All I've been hearing recently is Nintendo are greedy, and after the announcement of Switch 2's price and Mario Kart Worlds base price being $80, a lot of gamers aren't happy. And of course today I hear that Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is releasing with a DLC on the Switch 2 for $90 and people are going crazy. But to be honest, before we dive into these new prices in gaming, I felt like we had to dive back a little bit. Have a look how pricing has changed throughout the years, starting at the beginning.
Witness the birth of the incredible Nintendo Entertainment System?
Back in the 1980s with the Atari and the Nintendo Entertainment System, the era of the gaming console had begun, and the average price of games were between $30 and $50. Games like Super Mario Bros. Came out as a launch title on the NES to a $30 price tag, whereas Legend of Zelda just a year later came out with a $50 price tag. But to be real, the cartridge was gold, so I might have grabbed it as well. But by the 90s, game prices had risen by $10 all round. But with the arrival of the Super Nintendo, their average game price was around $50 to $60. But there were some outliers like Final Fantasy III and Chrono Trigger, which were a lot more expensive at $70 to $80. But why was this? Simply, it was because they were more expensive to produce. Cartridges weren't cheap, and RPG games at the time were pushing boundaries and requiring bigger cartridges, so therefore the price just went up. Players were pretty happy to pay more money because they were bigger games. But time went on, and in the late 90s, PlayStation 1 and the Nintendo 64 were released, with Nintendo 64's prices being around $50 to $80 per game, due to again the cartridge sizes and costs. Then the PlayStation 1 had a game price point at $40 to $50, so a lot less than the Nintendo 64. But this is because they went away from cartridges and started using CD-ROMs in their games, which were a lot cheaper to produce, costing anywhere under $2 to make, in comparison to the cartridge games, which cost a whopping $15 to $20 to make. So of course PlayStation could charge less. And then they also started a great line of games called the Greatest Hits, where they'd re-release popular games at cheaper prices, so pretty much budget-friendly gaming, which is almost unheard of now. But the gaming industry continued, leaving behind cartridge gaming and soon transferred from CDs to DVDs, then DVDs to Blu-ray. So the production of gaming was way cheaper than it used to be, and the average cost of games stayed around $60 throughout the 2000s until around the 2020s, where AAA games began creeping up their prices to the $70 mark.
We interrupt this broadcast for breaking news. Jay Cutty needs 1,000 subs. So if you could subscribe, we'd appreciate it very much. Thank you, goodbye.
Which brings us to now. Games have begun creeping up in price again, with Nintendo leading the way, charging a higher price for a game on a previous console with some DLC thrown in, and new games on consoles hitting the highest base price since the 80s. Then with speculation of GTA 6's price being maybe $100, which is all guesswork at this point to be honest, but is this all valid? Should games cost this much? Then on the other end of the spectrum is free games. Free games have become a massive thing in the recent gaming history, with the huge success of Fortnite, which makes all its money through microtransactions. And this brings up an interesting question. Would you rather a game be free but plastered with paid extras, or would you rather pay for a full game with no added extras but at a more expensive price? Because there's definitely going to be microtransactions in GTA, but it could still cost $100. And after looking back at how much all these games used to cost in the past, I have a few questions. Is the price we pay for games now actually more expensive than it used to be? And I'm not saying I'm a financial expert by any means, but something I see a lot in these costs from then to now arguments is inflation. And if we look at the games from the 1980s and what they would cost now, like for example Legend of Zelda, when it came out was $50 in the 80s, now would be a huge $130 to $140 in today's climate, which is mental. But let's be real, the reason these old games were expensive were the cartridges, as we mentioned before, and now the game industry has pretty much moved entirely to digital sales, so cartridges and production prices aren't really a problem. But if we deducted what the cartridges would have cost in 1980 with inflation added on now, what's about $50, you still have $80 to $90 for a game today. So is it valid for games to cost this much going forward? And would you be happy to pay these prices? And if not, there is still an argument. Games now cost a lot more to develop, with AAA games having huge budgets going anywhere between $200 million and $500 million, and the next GTA is rumored budget being $2 billion. So again, maybe a high price point is fair. Are we simply paying more for a huge product with hundreds of hours of content? Because that's what the arguments I've seen Mario Kart Worlds making. Is it okay to pay more for a product you know you'll get lots of entertainment out of? And how much are you willing to pay for that? I've seen so many people saying they'll happily pay tons of money for GTA because, well, it's GTA. One of the best game franchises of all time. But what if these games that promise so much come out as a disappointment? In today's gaming climate, I think it's a regular occurrence that games come out underwhelming and disappointing at launches. So would we as a community be happy to pay an extra price for games that come out as a complete and promised product? Which I know is impossible to guarantee, but maybe this is an incentive to the gaming industry. Gamers are much more willing to pay the big bucks for games they want and are going to come out great, but if the industry continues on the path it is of rushed releases and overpromised games, they might just lose all the trust they have in their fan bases. Another thing to think about is the price of gaming has shot up, in general that is, like the bar to entry is higher. All I think about is how expensive game accessories, monitors, memberships and subscriptions are now, so that could be a factor. Also, let's dive into gaming budgets a little bit. Gaming budgets are getting inflated due to marketing. Most marketing costs the same as a game's whole development now, which I'm sure in reality is just a waste of money, because let's be real, all that's really needed is simple videos, straight up interviews and a good trailer or two. Instead, you have companies spending out the wazoo for game showcases and flashy media. I mean, just the other day, I watched Marathon's gameplay showcase, where they obviously splashed out the big bucks to make a full show of it. I'm not saying it wasn't good or anything, but I'm sure they would have had the same effect if they just had a sofa in their dev studio and a camera. Then there's some indie game companies doing great work on YouTube like Semi-Work, the devs to the new game Repo, bringing out entertaining and great videos showing off their game and talking about development. Also another argument around the higher prices back at the start of gaming. I think some of it was because it was a new product, not as mainstream as today and not as accessible either. It was a novelty to have a Nintendo or an Atari, and as the gaming industry grew, especially in the 2000s, the price reflected the accessibility of consoles and games. But now companies like Nintendo are telling their customers that if they can't afford their new console, they just go and buy the old one? Damn, the balls on them. This is maybe the biggest red flag for me. As I've said in the past, it's all just a big money game for them now. They don't really care about bringing out a new and exciting product to fans, they just want to cash in, which doesn't really fill me with hope for the future of gaming. It makes me think back to that tweet I saw a while back from a game developer talking about people pirating his game, and the quote that really stuck with me was, "Culture shouldn't exist only for those who can afford it." And that's exactly how I feel about gaming. I understand gaming isn't going to be free, games cost money to create, but to obviously bump up prices just because you know gamers want your product? And well, where else are they gonna get it? Like, come on, asshole move. No wonder key buying websites are doing so well these days because, let's be real, no one can afford full price games. So, what do you think? As it's not up to me to tell you if these games are too expensive or you should buy them or not. In all truth, it's up to you to decide if they're too much. As in the current economic climate, I know I can't personally afford to waste my money on a big release for it to come out like a game like Star Wars Outlaws or Skull and Bones. It's hard to know the right answer, but I'm almost 100% certain on one thing: gaming prices aren't going to stay at $70 for long. With big boys like Nintendo starting the wave, I'm sure other companies are about to follow suit. So all I can say is, thank God for indie games.